Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Just opening up the Zoom room, letting people come in, and then we will get started. We are going to be discussing the last days of life today. And Tom, Heather, I'm hoping that you can just introduce yourselves briefly to get us started.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Heather and I are excited. We've been working on this presentation and trying to figure out what to talk about and present to you all. So we're excited to share some of our thoughts. Both of us are mental health counselors. I am a nurse practitioner and marriage family therapist by training, with 45 years now of caring for people primarily who are dying. And so in that capacity, I was the charge nurse of an inpatient hospice for a decade. And so I've seen many people die. And hopefully today we'll be able to share some of um, that witnessing with you all to give you a clearer sense of what these last couple days of life might hold.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Sonia. And I'm Heather. I'm also, like Tom said, I'm one of the Mettle counselors and a chaplain by training. I've been a chaplain for about 20 years, most of which I spent in hospice and palliative care. And happy to be here today to kind of share a little what I know and a lot of what my own kinds of maybe questions, experiences, observations are too that are kind of in the realm of just human experience, personal loss. Um, there's a great book that I do recommend on this topic if you haven't already read it, Advice for Future Corpses by Sally Tisdale. And she has this great line when she opens the book that says, "I've never died, so this entire book is a fool's advice. Birth and death are the only human acts we cannot practice." So with that as a caveat to what I will to be able to share today, we are all kind of in this human exploration of death, in very personal ways as well. So thanks.
And I'm so pleased and honored to be presenting with you, Heather, because sometimes I'll get focused on the details of what the body is doing, and I will rely on you to help bring me back into the room and to the broader realms of what's going on in this last days of life also. So it's great to be with you.
Oh, likewise. That's why I need your nurse practitioner grounding too to be able to stay focused and that's it's a great team kind of effort that way. So thanks.
Thank you both. Okay, so quick administrative stuff and then we'll get into it. So Heather and Tom are going to go through slides, and after they get through the slides, there's a couple of ways you can interact with us. You can click on the raise hand button and speak with Heather and Tom. And if you'd prefer to not do that, you can type it into the Q&A and I will read it aloud for you. The chat is also open, so if you have any thoughts that come up that you want to put in there, please do. And yeah, let's get started. Thanks so much for being here.
You know, one of the things to lead this off is one of the seminal points that I want people to know about is that the body knows how to die. And that if we allow a natural death of our loved one or ourself, my experience of many, many decades tells me that that is a very natural, normal, and peaceful process. So I just want to encourage people to hold that, because I know that there's a lot of fear and worry about this process, and for good reason, but the body knows how to die. Just like Heather was saying, the body knows how to birth and the body knows how to leave. So trust in the process and be aware of the messages that your body or your loved one's bodies might be giving. Within all of that, there's these overlays around these days, our last days of life, moving toward death. We just know that we all have been born into cultures and families and belief systems that are literally constructed around what happens after death and what the meaning of life is. So many religions are essentially built on heaven and hell, reincarnation, what it means to be alive, and what it's like to die. So I want us to be aware of the assumptions that we walk into this discussion with. And many of the assumptions, in my experience in working with patients and families who are dying, are kind of not reviewed in detail. And by that, I mean we're often taught a certain religion or belief about what happens after death, and we kind of accept it without a lot of thought because death isn't really foremost in our mind when we're a kid or a teen growing up. But as we reach toward the end of our life, we do start to bring back in these teachings and beliefs around what happens when we die. And sometimes those are a great comfort to us as we move toward dying. And other times they're a confusion because then we start to wonder, what are these things that I believed and are they meaningful as I get closer? So I'm just putting out there that a lot of our beliefs and the myths around death and dying become more prominent at this time as we move in the last days of life. Heather?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I think in addition, there's a way in which our confrontation with our mortality or death kind of excavates like our deepest held beliefs.
Mm.
So we may have actually been doing a lot of our own, like in a spiritual context, for example, we might be doing a lot of spiritual contemplation, meditation retreats, things like that that are really a part of our life now. And this incredibly vulnerable, sometimes very terrifying, scary, loss of control experience of dying, either within ourselves or watching someone that we love die, can really excavate kind of things we thought we had let go of, you know, guilt paradigms, guilt ideas, forgiveness ideas, that can really kind of come up to the center. And then we also have to live in the kind of the plurality, right? The complexity of we are all having those experiences. So, for example, as a chaplain, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to be with somebody as they're dying and to have like 5 or 6 people in the room, all of whom are holding different beliefs about what is happening at death, different hopes about what happens or what it needs to happen, whether it's in a religious context, cultural context. So how do we hold that space for everybody, knowing that wherever you are coming to this topic today, I don't know whether you're coming to it as somebody who is thinking concretely about your own death right now, or you're accompanying somebody in your life who is doing that, or if it's part of the larger kind of, inquiry that you have. Um, but it's a very raw space that brings up our deepest mysteries and fears about this unknown, and we honor that while also acknowledging we can't answer, everybody's,
Yeah.
differences. Yeah.
I really love that comment about everyone in the room has their lenses that they're looking at these days of the last days of their loved one's life. And that's a good thing to keep in mind because every symptom and every moment might mean different things to each of the people in the room. And I think that this brings us to this last point on this slide is the mysteries surrounding death. Heather and I can say what we've witnessed in being with people who are dying, but we haven't died. We simply don't know what's on the other side of the curtain, as I sometimes call it. But I'm aware that when I'm in the room with someone who is moving toward death, there is a fluttering of the curtain. I'm aware of some of the mysteries that are all around us. I become more heightened to some of some of what's happening, and I become more aware of the synchronicities that seem to be happening, or the awe of this amazing experience that's both tragic and overwhelmingly beautiful and mysterious. And so I want to just encourage people as we go through the last days of life. When you are facing this, stay aware and open to the mystery and the possibility that you don't know. We've, even within all your beliefs and your myths and your cultural biases, maybe there's something that you hadn't thought of or prepared for, and just listen for that.
Absolutely.
Okay?
So from the perspective of being somebody who is caring for somebody who is dying, um, then it kind of really, I think, builds on what you're sharing, Tom, about being aware of ourselves and what we are bringing to the room. And I also would encourage a great deal of self-compassion in that, right? Because usually by the time we come to the last days,
Hmm.
as caregivers, we will be exhausted. We will be fried with already having perhaps been in a state of caregiving for weeks, months, even years. And we are exhausted. We are perhaps conflicted about what we feel. You know, perhaps we have mixed emotions about I'm not ready, I am ready, I want this to happen. I will feel relief when my person is gone. I feel guilty that I will feel relief. So I really encourage a lot of compassion for ourselves as we are in this space, because I think even with the best of intentions, it can be messy to be in um, this this really sort of surreal sometimes, where time kind of gets suspended. You know, the ordinary tasks of life suddenly just kind of cease to make sense anymore. Like we're not able to make maybe even, you know, remember the most basic self-care tasks. You know, we may not take a shower, we may not feel the energy to do any of that. We're just kind of in this altered space. So taking care of yourself in that is there's permission. I hope you will hear permission in that. There's permission to take care of yourself as you are caring for someone who is in their last days. And it is not a statement of one or the other, or abandoning the person that you love if you have to step away, if you need to um, take care of your body. Were you going to say something, Tom?
Well, I was going to essentially agree with you. I
Yeah,
think especially in these days, which are very heightened and intense, that you're caring for someone who is dying, but you also do need to take care of yourself. And this process of the person letting go of their body is very personal to them. And yet you also have an important part in this process. And I know that we might talk on this later, but as a person who is dying moves toward their death, very often that person will enter a liminal state where they're less connected to the world. And no matter how deep your love is, they're needing to shift and move somewhere else. And so sometimes these last days of life for the caregiver can be a little surprising, because your main support, the person who was dying sometimes, is less present for you. And so just prepare for that and know that this is a natural process. And this is your process too. So you have to find this way to balance and give what your loved one needs and also take care of yourself. Because of course,
yeah,
if you give everything, and then you become sick or exhausted and unable to provide, or even unable to emotionally be present for your loved one, then it's less ideal. So we have to
yeah,
find this balance for caring for someone who is caring for someone who is dying.
yeah, absolutely. And I you know, we'll talk about it more later too, about the the location of where someone is dying. And I know there's all different ways that you may or may not have support around you, like what that looks like, either within family, chosen family, friends. If it's a more solitary experience, if you're in a healthcare facility where you're only really being tended to by professional caregivers. I mean, there's a lot of different iterations of this, right? And so where
Yeah,
you
in
come in as
fact,
a caregiver, as a loved one who is a caregiver, some of the ways in which that will shift for us when we are caring for someone at the end of their lives will be that we're moving away from task-oriented type like interventions and tasks more to being with, and how do we kind of join into their process and to be attentive to what is happening in them,
yeah, and I think
rather
that
than doing things to them. Yeah.
I think you're speaking to the next slide, so why don't we
Yeah.
advance to that? Because when Sonia and Heather and I were discussing how do we talk to folk about the last days of life, one of the things that came up for us is that the location of where someone is really impacts all ways around these last couple days. So we'd like to drill down a little bit into this. And and the reason here's the reason why. 30% in America today, 30% of people die in their home. 35% of people in America die in the hospital or the intensive care unit. And 27% of people die in a skilled nursing facility or a residential care facility. Now, maybe a lot of you in the metal community are going to have your loved one, or you're going to choose to die at home. But these choices or wishes that we have don't always work out. And so sometimes, because of need, you might end up in the hospital. And maybe you can be sprung from the hospital and get home, or maybe not. And so I think it's important, even if your plans are explicit that you wish to die at home, that we talk about each of these locations, because as Heather alluded, there are different support systems in each of these. And so I feel like we need to all be prepared, regardless where we are, so that our movements, our interventions can be supportive and as positive as possible. So if we're talking about the home, usually people who have gone home to die are on hospice care. And hospice care in America is going through some crises right now. And so we should say that most hospices are fantastic, supportive, 24-hour care, on-call availability, really good. Some are less than perfect, but still have many of the services. The issue with hospice is that, or with being at home, even when you have hospice, is that a lot of the physical care will be done by the families and friends of the person who is dying. Hospice is not going to place a nurse in the home 24 hours a day. They're going to come when there's a crisis or a need, and they're going to help you sort out and manage symptoms, and all of that's incredibly helpful. But you may be alone with your dying loved one more than if in other environments. And so consistent with that is that it's going to be quieter. It's going to be more home-like because you're in the home, but it might also be a little scarier. And you might be called to do some tasks, some physical tasks of giving medicines or turning and positioning someone that you need to learn, and that might be a little stressful. So that's home. If we go to the hospital, and Heather has more expertise in hospital deaths, I've been out of a hospital for a long time, but I think generally we can say if someone is in the hospital these days, they're acutely ill, and that includes the person who is dying. And so that probably implies that you've got IVs, You have professional nursing care. And if you're in the intensive care unit, that's an extra layer of intensity of intervention. And so in the hospital and the intensive care, it's pretty obvious. You're going to have people coming in and out of your room. It won't be as home-like. You're going to have procedures and medicines and different people coming and going. And in most intensive care units these days, for the loved one who is dying there, visiting hours are extended, or you can visit all the time and be in the room. But sometimes in some hospitals, you can't. And there are set visiting hours, particularly for intensive care, but also sometimes for the hospital. So you're going to be around professional staff, registered nurses who can adjust medicines and intervene quickly in a crisis, but you're also going to have less peace and quiet. Heather, anything else to say about hospital and ICU?
No, I think I would only add that, I appreciate you really naming all the differences in locations. And for me, it's not that all things being equal, right? They're very different situations, but I don't have judgment about how we end up in any one of those places. I know that it is complicated and there are a lot of things that are out of our control, things that are outside of our financial means, things that are, challenging to predict, so my dad, he died in an ICU. I've been with people who've died in the ICU many times. And I have seen the way that in any context, with loving intention, with caring intention, every space becomes sacred in that way.
I love that. I think that's beautifully said, and I appreciate that. And if we took a poll right now of everyone listening in the metal community, how many people want to die at home? Most likely, a lot of people would raise their hands. But if we look at the statistics, some of the people raising their hands may not end up there. And that's because they need the hospital and they need the intensive care. And Heather's point that there are loving caregivers and good support systems in every environment. And it's just taking a look at here's how I need to interface differently based on where I am. And so the last locations I want to specify is a skilled nursing facility and a residential care facility. Now, skilled nursing facility, some of you may be familiar with, this is a subacute hospital, and it's usually for a lot of people have had strokes or heart attacks and they go there for rehabilitation. But sometimes someone who's dying may end up in a skilled nursing facility because they have skilled nursing needs. And that means there are nurses on staff, but these nurses have a slightly different focus. They may not be quite the acute care skilled interventionists in the ICU, and they also may not be focused on promoting a gentle death because the nurses in skilled nursing facilities are rehab nurses. And so you may be called to help the employees at a skilled nursing facility really provide comfort care to your dying loved one. In a skilled nursing facility, you can bring in a hospice program. And so that's something to keep in mind. In both residential care facilities and skilled nursing facilities, you can have a hospice team visiting your loved one, and they can help promote and educate the skilled nursing facility family and the residential care and into how to give care and provide comfort. So that I think is a distinction between the hospital and a skilled nursing facility. A further distinction for residential care facilities, these are often home-like environments that are staffed 24 hours a day by non-skilled labor. So the folk living in a residential care facility might not need skilled nursing care like IVs, intravenous in hydration, but they might need turning and positioning and incontinence care and help with feeding. And so this is residential care facilities can be very peaceful and gentle. Oftentimes they are 5 or 6 bed houses, but they're non-skilled labor. And so that means sometimes the caregivers are frightened by death and will need extra support in how to provide this care. So this is another example of where the hospice team coming into a residential care can be helpful in providing comforting care in a residential care facility. Um, so these distinctions I think are fairly vital. Now I think we can sort of shift to some of the stuff that you guys may be waiting for, which is how do we do this care and what should we look for?
And this this slide is really, I think, interestingly enough, I think bringing attention to the relational kind of unfinished aspects that, I think are often a part of our lives. I think almost all of us have something in our lives that we could probably say these 4 things to or about. This is language that Dr. Ira Byock popularized as the 4 things that matter most and have deep, um, deep roots in the indigenous Hawaiian tradition of Ho'oponopono, this deep reconciliation work. And what I think is important about these phrases in the last days of life is understanding that by the time we're talking about the last days of life, we're probably not going to be having any more in-depth conversations. We're not going to be able to go back in time with the person and do that kind of deep, kind of unboxing of, the unfinished business. But these statements, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, I love you, really are sort of at the core of what we would maybe be asking for or needing as we are preparing to die or preparing to say goodbye to somebody who's dying. And so I think to start there, at least with the awareness that a lot of, I think, our popular portrayals of the last days of life will have these amazing conversations, or the person is able to give these really lucid final words that just, make peace and, there's forgiveness and healing. And it's not that that never happens. But by the time that we're talking about that, usually the active dying, the pre-active or active dying stage of death, these might be the only statements that we can offer. And it may not be enough, and yet it can do so much to release a sense of pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain, to be able to, so you can do it. I always encourage people, if these are things that you need to say to anybody, say them earlier than later, but it's never too late.
I
And yeah.
I love these statements. I first discovered them with Ira's book, The 4 Things That Matter Most, but later found, like you had said, the indigenous Hawaiian culture has had this in existence forever. To me, like you, Heather, these are a core fundamental communication between any any 2 people. And you can do this today to everyone you love, and it
Yeah.
could be, like Heather says, a very big unpacking. Please forgive me that time I, took your car and wrecked it. And, I feel bad about that. And I forgive you for that time. So you can go into great detail around this. And you can do it now with everyone. I find them incredibly healing. There's something around it, it just ties it together so that you're in your relationship, there isn't anything unsaid. To me, this covers the totality of how we connect. And I find them very healing. And you'll notice that these statements are all essentially I statements, and I perceive them as the caregiver speaking to the dying person. But the dying person could also say these. And when I'm working with people at Mettle Health who are transitioning, I encourage them to have these brief statements. And like Heather says, sometimes they're involved, but sometimes they're not. And these, because they are spoken, it is possible to say these even while someone can't respond. You know, you can be at the bedside of your dying partner and say these things, and they will have impact for you. At least I have experienced that. So I think that this slide is very powerful, and I think it offers an opportunity to kind of open us and at the same time seal us together.
Yeah, I just offer maybe one thing about the thank you that I have found really helpful, which I know there's sometimes I would say popular wisdom to be able to tell somebody you give them permission to go. Like that's the language we might use to give someone permission to
Mhm.
go, or to tell them that you're going to be okay. And I am a big believer in not saying things that are not true for you, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not at peace, if you're not feeling like you're going to be okay, if and I struggle with the word permission because I don't want us to take responsibility for another person's death, right? Like there's something very personal and solitary about what they're going through that I'm not going to take response. If I say you can go and then they don't go, it's not something that I did, right, to affect that. I have learned that the thank you in this phrasing can be helpful oftentimes there might be ways that we can say thank you instead of goodbye. You know, thank you for teaching me.
Mhm.
Thank you for teaching me how to always, you know, always take care of things, how to fix the lights or how to drive my car. Thank you for helping me to believe in love, or thank you. And sometimes I think the thank you can hold all of those things that can be more genuine, like for people who may feel pressured to say it's okay to go, I give you permission. Yeah, so that's one thing I've learned about the thank you, if that resonates with anybody else.
I really, it does resonate with me. And when I was talking about it, I realized like, I totally agree. Don't say these things if they're not right for you. I don't want to force someone to say, I love you if you're feeling conflicted at that moment. It's fine. Just say the things that are real to you, uh, and let that be enough. You know, I don't expect, I feel like these four things work even in a conflicted relationship, because let's be honest, what relationship isn't conflicted to some degree, right? So I feel these work. But if there's a lot of turmoil, we don't want to pull this out of anyone. It's a possible guide that can offer some comfort in this process.
Yeah,
Okay, why don't we
great.
move? So now we're getting into the meat of things. In the days before death, a lot of this stuff, let me take a breath back on these things are great for what can be done in the days before death, and let's talk about them first. First, I want to talk about some of the physical symptoms that we may see in the days before death before we get to what we can do. Um, so one thing to keep in mind is that in general, medical providers overestimate how long someone will live. And so, pretty reliably, if you have a doctor who has been very close to the person who is dying, say that they may have a month left to live, it's likely that means a week or days. And that's been pretty consistent across my 45 years. And the closer the physician is to the person who is dying, the worse their prognostication is. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing, in the days leading up to dying, you become aware of a shift in the room. The person who is dying becomes more pulled in, less talkative. They start to eat a little less. They drink a little less. They aren't as engaged. The football game that they used to care about, that they were waiting for, suddenly they don't really care like they used to. These can be signs that we are entering the days of before death. When someone is moving into their liminal state, I kind of see them as on a runway or they're moving to a different place. And so the things that were important become a little less important. Um, Another important thing that is so common that you'll now find it in the hospice literature is people saying that they're going on a trip, they're getting ready for a vacation, they have to pack, they don't want to miss their flight. And most particularly, people say, I need to go up. And these are just facts. You can make of them what you will, but I will say that this is so common. Maybe 40% of people who are dying, as they move into a little bit of confusion, may start living in this liminal world and speaking about going up. If a person eats less and drinks less, that's a natural process here. And a lot of times families recognize it and worry about that. And they feel they need to do IV hydration if they're in the hospital, or they need to insert an NG tube to give nutrition. And here's where I need to remind people that the body knows how to die. In general, hydrating and giving nutrition to someone who is days before death doesn't help. And in fact, it makes things worse because extra fluid, the body naturally will dehydrate. The body knows how to leave. And one of the ways it does is it gets rid of the fluid in the body. By doing that, they don't have congestion as they move toward poorer respirations. So the more hydrated a person is, the more likely they are to have a lot more congestion and secretions. So someone getting IVs in the hospital is going to be more congested. If you're at home and you've been naturally declining toward your death, you will find that you don't have as much congestion and need for spitting up. So when a person is dying or in the last days before death, obviously they're going to be getting out of bed less often. And so our care interventions need to shift a little too. Now we need to start thinking about their skin. They might become newly incontinent of their urine or their bowel. And so we might have to change them more often or position them on their side so their skin doesn't break down. And these are the times when a hospice nurse can really be incredibly helpful in helping you anticipate some of the changes to the body that need to be protected to ensure comfort. So this transition can happen for weeks, slowly, or it can happen fairly rapidly. But a lot of the things I touched on, where people stop eating and drinking and take to bed and become more confused, you will see this with more frequently in the last couple days of life. Now, Heather, you have some of these wonderful things. So here's the physical body declining. Here are some things we might be able to do when working with that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I would maybe as a bridge to this list, when you talk about, when our bodies no longer, want to take in nutrition or hydration, or it starts to work kind of against the process that we're in. I know it's distressing to caregivers, to loved ones sometimes. It's like counterintuitive, right? Like everything in our life has been about keeping this body fueled and
Mhm.
going. And so it works against our our whole beingness. And so caregivers who are in a position of that they're still trying to feed. I really have a lot of compassion for that. And so I think trying to hold that there's a space where we naturally move away from physical nourishment towards what I would describe as like inner nourishment, emotional nourishment, spiritual nourishment. That the ways that we start to nourish a person who are dying, who is dying, is through the the sort of the acts of presence, the ways that we can be present with and to join with their experience. So that's through, breath work and mindfulness practices, prayers, using appropriate scriptures, poetry, essential oils, aromatherapy can be very helpful. Music, life review, gentle life review on the bedside. Really creating what I would describe as like a sacred space, or like drawing a kind of imaginary circle even around the person wherever they're at, whether they're in a SNF, ICU, at home, that there's this sense of nourishment that can now like happen towards joining with where they are releasing from this world. So touching into the senses is really lovely, like having aromatherapy, having light touch, having a soft sounds, things that can engage the senses, but without like kind of drawing the person back
Yeah.
into the physical realm. So we don't want to activate, kind of strong emotional responses or mind-body reactions. There's a real kind of that as we enter what we call vigil, right? We are watching over. We are in a space of watching over this person, and it becomes more of the way that we can be present with, um, being in the present moment, and really orienting towards the person, right? The person that in that moment, we don't know. Let me say it in this way. I don't know who I will be in that moment. So I can tell you, I can have a death plan of the things that I will want at my death, the music I will want to have played, the people I would want to have present, any rituals. And then there's the person I will be in that moment. And to be honest, I don't know what I'm going to need to feel safe, to feel at peace, to feel supported. And so my hope is that I will be surrounded by people who can attune, right? Oh, she said she wanted this music. Oh, it's not work. She seems kind of agitated right now. We don't know why. Let's see if silence helps, right? It's being able to kind of be attuned to the person, and being almost experimental. What works, what helps from day to day. It's not an absolute map, right? We're kind of feeling our way in the dark, together for a person that is dying and taking their lead. And to me, there's this really important, I guess I would say, ethic that I also feel is important when you are a person of faith, is that I totally believe it's important that we lean into our own resources to be in this vigil space, right? So whatever helps you to be present, whatever helps you to be grounded, to put your own kind of like fears in a place that can be held, that may be a spiritual practice, a religious practice, a visualization. I really believe in keeping that in an inward way, like doing that kind of silently. If I don't share that same worldview with the person who is dying, because ultimately their experience is primary. And so if they were an atheist, for example, I'm not going to bring any language to to counter that, right? It can be my resource, but it's an inward, quiet resource. So it's something that's a very unadaptive, um, intuitive space. Trusting that you will maybe not get it right all the time, and that's to be expected. There's no way to do this and to not have a sense of like, did I do it right, or did I, do you know what I'm, does that make
Well,
sense to you, Tom?
I think you make an excellent point around the um, the truth of uncertainty in these days. And I love that, like, the plans that we all had may need to shift based on what you're feeling. Once again, it's like stay open to the uncertainty, to something bigger than who you are. Because in these days before death, we're entering into the liminal state with the person who's moving on
Yes,
or
yes.
changing. And so just be aware of that. I'm aware of time, so I want to move to the next
Yeah,
slide.
I just want to read really quickly some of these comments that have come in. It just feels like a really
Yes.
beautiful way to hold that.
Yeah.
I'll just, Noha says, my dad loved sitting outdoors, and even though he was unconscious for a week, I got him up in a wheelchair to sit outside. The power of nature. Sarah mentioned my sister loved holding hands. Karen says, Yo-Yo Ma is definitely on my death playlist. And
It's
also Noha
beautiful.
said she recorded my dad, a blessing for all of us. I recorded my dad's blessing to all of us kids. So again, there's many different ways to do this. Each one is unique and precious in their own way, and not, it's meant to be something that you can take and apply in your own life.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are
So thank you,
beautiful. I'm so
everybody.
glad you
Yeah.
mentioned. Yeah. All right. In the moments before death, you will be aware of a shift. Suddenly, someone will become less awake. They'll become less able to speak. They'll be sleeping a lot. They'll be bedbound. You may notice if you're taking the pulse that the pulse may go way up. And then toward the closeness of death, the pulse may go down. So you'll actually notice these physical manifestations that are very body centered to start with. And you may, when you touch their hands, they may be cold. And when you check or their hand and feel their pulse in their wrist or in their feet, you may not feel a pulse because the heart is wearing down and the heart is reaching a place where it can no longer perfuse all parts of the body. And this will result in a declined level of consciousness because it's not perfusing the brain the way it used to. I will note that there is a phenomenon in these hours or moments before death, and sometimes days before death, called terminal lucidity. It's very common, where a person who looks like they're moving toward dying will suddenly wake up, eat a meal, have a conversation, and then go back down. So there is occasionally you'll have a moment of terminal lucidity. The pulse we've talked about, the cooling of the extremities. Once again, these are all natural. There's no emergency. There's no need to intervene. None of these symptoms are uncomfortable. Right toward the end of death, you will notice person's breathing will become irregular. Instead of breathing regularly, first we'll start to breathe fast, like a respiratory rate of 40 or 50, and then we'll become uneven. It's called Cheyne-Stoking breath, where some are very large and then they become quite minimal and then they become quite large again. And toward the end, in the last moments of death, you will recognize uh, something I think they call it jaw breathing, but I always referred to it as fish breathing, where the body is no longer pulling in breath, but instead the jaw is doing this. That usually says we're within moments of dying. So these are symptoms that you may see Might be, when you start seeing some of these, it might be time to call in the family, to fortify your resources, to make sure the music is playing or however you want it to be, being fully aware, like Heather said, you can't predict, but just do what you can. Those are the physical symptoms. But during this whole process, in the moments before death, I find almost always that the energy in the room shifts and it becomes almost like electrified. To me, this is the way I have interpreted probably 1,000 people dying. I've been with 1,000 people who've died, and the room is somewhat electric. It's crackling. And this is just my perceptions, but I think you might be aware of shifts in the room. And what we've been saying is listen, be aware, be open to what's happening when the curtain is fluttering. But don't be bummed out if none of this happens. Like don't expect magic, but listen for it because it might be there for you in these last moments.
Hey Tom, can I interrupt you both with two questions? One, is it okay if we go a little bit over? I'm just preemptively
Yes.
asking. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Ginger had a question on this specifically. She's asking about a particular smell in someone's breath. Is that a natural part of a body shutting down?
Uh, yes, Ginger, the phenomenon is dehydration. A person isn't making the fluid that they used to, so their saliva is very thick, and that makes their mouth dry out, and then that gives them pretty bad breath. And hospice people and hospital people know about touthettes, which have a little bit of toothpaste on them, and you can swab out a person's mouth. Um, so my experience is usually that. And then of course the sweat that is going to have a different smell to it also because of the dehydration. So these phenomenon that Ginger has experienced is very common and very natural and normal. And there are, you can take a warm soapy washcloth and clean a person. You can swab their mouth. There are ways to address uh, the changes in their body.
Great, thank you. Should I go to the next one?
I think so. So the person does some mouth breathing. We're all gathered at the bedside, and then the mouth breathing stops or the jaw breathing stops. And sometimes the person's face relaxes, the muscles relax like this, and usually the pupils of the eye will fix, and there'll be no more breath. And that's the moments when someone has died. And it's pretty common for people, for loved ones to look around and wonder, was that it? Are they dead? And in different environments, the pronouncement of death is done different ways. In the hospital, a nurse or a doctor will come to the bedside and listen with their stethoscope to their heart and to their jugular, to their aorta to see if there's a pulse. In the home, the hospice nurse will come out. Now, generally, families know when their loved one has died, and you can sense it, but it usually needs to be formalized in any setting. So you'll usually need a professional of some sort to come and say, you don't want that on you. The professional will pronounce. Sometimes when someone dies, they purge, they poop, they pee, and sometimes even the stomach contents comes out their mouth. That's more common in people who are more hydrated. If you've naturally dehydrated, there's less of that, but it does happen and it's a natural process. When your loved one has died, the vigil isn't necessarily over, but the pressure or expedience is. And now there's no rush. There isn't anything that you have to do. People can take the time that they need to be with their loved ones. And everyone's going to be different at that. Some religions say, you know, you need to be buried right away. Other people want the body out of their house as soon as possible. Other people want to sit with their loved one's body for hours. And that's okay. You can do that. I mean, you can't do that for days, but you can take the time that you need to fully experience this. And I was thinking of when Heather talked about sitting vigil and retelling stories, you know, as the person's moving toward their death. These are things that can go on after someone has died too. So I just want to encourage people that this is the time for your rituals. And this is the time for you to grieve and to make it real, you know, to really feel that your loved one has left. So it's your time. Heather, anything to add to that?
No, I think I love what you said about how vigil isn't necessarily over
Mm-hmm.
at the time of death, and to allow that time in a way for us to breathe again. You know, in some ways we've been breathing with the person as they are leaving this life. Sometimes literally, like that's something that I have done and encourage others to do, just to breathe with that person. And then there's this kind of coming back to our own bodies and coming back to this new reality where they're dead, and there's this transition from life to death that's it's very tangible. Like it's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it. If you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. That death arrives very very quickly, and then maybe there's ways in which there's like sort of a process in which it arrives. But when that animating force of a person's life is gone, it really is a new reality. And how do we make space to, whether you are a person who has like a religious tradition or not, or but to really kind of mark like the significance, the sacredness of moving from life to death.
Mm-hmm.
It's not universal for everybody. I do think it's often helpful for people to spend time with the body after death in their grieving process. It's not universal, you know, recommendation. It's only, you know, if you're not that person, it's okay too. But this is a time where you can really, whether it's anointing the body, washing the body, you know, really having time, even in a hospital or a SNF, you are allowed time. And I think in California where I'm at, I think the standard is like 4 hours or so usually with the body. But even then, there are sometimes exceptions where if a family's coming from out of town and they get there after the death, to make space, to make time, the charge nurse, the hospital, you know, supervisor may have some leverage to work with you to make that space what you need it to be for you for that moment.
I'm
Um,
I'm
yeah,
also struck by the comments that are coming in, where a
yeah,
number of people are telling some really beautiful stories
yeah.
of their loved ones' deaths. And I'm really just recognize that this moment of transition is incredibly meaningful and powerful to everyone. And I'm so pleased to hear how people coped with it and how they feel about the process of being with their loved one as they're dying. And I want to quickly go to the last slide, just because I want to just go back to the fact that death is normal. And at the same time, it's extraordinary. Like Heather was saying, it's a major transition in anyone's life, like our birth, our marriage, our children's birth, our death. This is a big one. And being aware of your loved one's transition and being part of it is extraordinary. And it's just, as I keep referring to the lifting of the curtain, watching someone die is an opportunity to recognize that we might all be more than our bodies, and that we might be connected in very uh, infinite ways. And sometimes this heightened experience of death is incredibly powerful and healing, and it moves us to a deeper place in our life. And so I would just encourage everyone, because everyone is going to die and be with people who they love who are going to die, to be open to this experience of what is happening. Heather, anything to add? And I don't know if we have time for questions or how Sonia wants to.
Oh, so beautifully said, beautifully expressed. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, I'll stop here and we can go to some questions. Thank you so much, you two. Okay, Karen said, what is the medical definition of death? Heart stops and brain stops working equals death. As a Buddhist, I believe my consciousness will continue, and the protocol is to not touch the body for 3 days so that the consciousness may be guided to the bardo. But yeah, what is the medical definition of this?
Heart stopped, no breath. I think those are the ones that are, yeah. I don't think there's much to add about that. And I wonder how Buddhists cope with a hospital death, because they're not going to be able to not be touched for 3 days. I've
I have
encountered that.
witnessed that. I have witnessed that, and I think in some ways that has to, it's really particular to the person, their resources, what their family is able to, or their chosen family is able to commit to, their sangha is able to support them with. Um, Even to be able to hold any amount of that intention in a hospital setting matters, right? And also, I've seen people be very carefully taken home. We don't. There's a whole other topic about what we can, what about. I think even Ginger mentioned home funerals and the process, and there's a whole other maybe topic around what happens when we move into care of the body and taking possession of the body after a person dies, mortuary, all of those things.
Mhm.
If you have specific religious practice needs, having some kind of plan in place and, prior if possible, or having that communicated to hospital staff can really matter. Even with Jewish patients with in a hospital with Jewish teachings around not leaving the body alone,
Mhm.
we try to accommodate that. We try to step in. I may not be able to be there 24 hours, but I have sat with a person who died, a Jewish person who died, um, as long as I could, a couple of hours until they were perhaps able to be transitioned to, um, a different circle of care. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can work within your own spiritual religious communities to see what's possible in working with those settings.
Yeah, I'm realizing that's a whole talk, isn't it?
Yeah.
After death and management and rituals and just all that.
Yeah. Okay, if anyone else has another question or a comment, please do let us know. But you two covered so much.
We covered so much, and yet I feel like,
It's
gosh,
just the
yeah, I could do, an hour on just physical care and what to look out for. But we really wanted to have larger domains discussed in these last days of life, consistent with who we are at Mettle, and so I hope that we were able to touch on stuff that was meaningful and also helpful to you. And it's such a pleasure to give the presentation with you, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, very much.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank
Ginger
you,
said
everybody.
she'd love a presentation about post-death, so maybe we will have to do that and go into it much deeper. Thank you both. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Wishing
Thank you,
everyone a wonderful
everyone.
weekend. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.